A very short chapter on this particular structure. Well, the author calls it the 3-3 versus 4-2 pawn structure. And, well, it's easy to understand why, right? So it's 3-3 versus 4-2. It happens mainly from, I would say, a Caro-Kann or a French. Imagine a pawn on d4 being undermined by c5, and then there is an exchange, and we end up in this structure. If you look at it from the white perspective, well, I was about to say white has more space on the king side. At first sight, that sounds wrong, right? I mean, well, there's obviously no more space due to these pawns. This pawn structure doesn't give more space, but perhaps I would say the pawn on e6 limits black a little bit, so black's natural activity is on the c file, and there's probably going to be a bishop locked in somewhere here. And this gives white sort of freedom to attack with pieces on the king side. Imagine a knight on f3, a bishop on c2, a bishop on e3, and it's all going to flow naturally in the direction of the black king side, right? Typically black would have a king on g8. And this can lead to, well, quite some interesting attacks against the black king. The d file perhaps, is not that relevant for white. I mean, you could maybe imagine a rook sort of pivoting on the d4 square going in the direction of the black king, but mainly it's just something that you will see for exchanges. But as I tried to describe, there is scenarios where it's actually quite pleasant for white. But I think generally it's seen as a very solid structure for black. And if we reverse it like this, well, we can see for black, it's, a very solid blockade in front of your king. There is no obvious way that the white pawns can sort of start to break it down. As I mentioned, from white's perspective, you really have to use your pieces to attack the black king's position on g8. And that's normally not that easy. Also, well, the open d file means that black can quite quickly oppose on the d file, and the white attack is not easily getting going with an open file like this. The semi-open file, the c file, should also be quite useful for black, right? It's easy to imagine two rooks standing on d8 and c8 having quite some influence. But of course, the big thing for black, I would say, is the potential of pushing your pawns here and doing some kind of minority attack. And while this is generally seen as a solid and defensive structure for black that is completely sound, it can also be used in a sort of long-term sort of potential to actually try to pacify sort of, well, the typical minority attack thing, that you try to eliminate your opponent's advantage and then you have your own potential later, let's say in the end game, something like this. So it's seen as a solid structure for black. Certainly white has his share of attacking wins, but in general it's quite solid for black, and there is even this long-term potential. But let's try and look at it with just one game. Our example in this structure is a very favorable one for black. It's Le Quang Liem having the black pieces against a quite lower rated opponent. And when trying to win with the black pieces, well, you try to seek imbalances, typically in pawn structures, but here also he has actually been gifted the pair of bishops as well. So it's pretty favorable for black. But as we will see, probably less tragic than one would see at first sight. I mean, at first sight, for me, it looks like black should be close to strategically winning. And that's actually quite a bit much here. But indeed, I mean, when I mentioned in the introduction that white chances lies on sort of attacking on the king's side, well, that's not going to happen here. He has too few pieces for that. There is no sort of dark-colored bishop on c1, and black is just way too solid. So white has to think in defensive terms. The author mentions that if you immediately tries to get rid of the pair of bishops, like playing the move knight to c6, then we will take and play the move b4. And, well, basically, it just undermines the structure. And let's say if you keep exchanging like this, then this pawn is just lost due to the pin in sort of the long diagonal. So this would not really do for white. He chose to play the move queen to d3, which is quite logical. It gains a bit of time by attacking the pawn on h7. So the pawn goes forward. I mean, you can always make a case for playing g6 instead of h6. I think here it really doesn't matter. They're quite sort of equal in strength. White chooses to centralize, rook a d1, black finishes development, a3 stopping b4, and the rook goes to c8. I think putting the rooks like this is quite instructive. I mean, well, it would be logical to oppose in the d file, but that would generally just lead to exchanges. And it's not only because black is lower rated that he wants to win. His position is also objectively better. So just opposing in the open file would be like underplaying the position to a certain extent. Also, to make it perfectly clear, I mean, white starting to attack makes very little sense. I mean, well, the offer suggests, let's say, f4, a5, f5. Black can just play a move like e5 and, well, nothing has been gained. Mainly you have managed to create a weakness and to some extent also weakening your king if the bishop relocates to the c5 square. So white really has to do it passively. And queen f3 is generally a nice move. Then a5. Now, sort of the author is saying that what white does now is wrong. He should really play the move knight to c2. And it's generally a clever idea. It's getting ready for, well, preventing b4. And let's say something like this. When b4 eventually is going to happen, at least we're going to exchange everything on b4 and just hope that we'll be capable of drawing this structure. But we'll talk a little bit about this structure that sort of happens when the queenside get liquidated later. So let's do it like at that point. Rook d3 is actually quite a decent move. Bishop e8 is typical. As I said, our plan is not to be opposing in the d file. So vacating it with the bishop is very solid. It makes sure that when white doubles, then suddenly there's no knight jump and the bishop on d7 would be hanging. It's a very actually typical to have the bishop on e8 in such structures. It is sort of hidden away from the action, but still very useful. I mean, if it's on d7 or e8, doesn't make a difference in this diagonal, right? So I think that's, well, it's quite a very typical and quite a useful move in many ways. So the game was rook f to d1 and then b4. And now there comes the swap on b4 like this. And generally, black has sort of gotten his dream, right? He still has the pair of bishops, and he's managed to what we want to do with the minority attack, that these sort of free white pawns has completely lost any kind of offensive potential, and what we have managed to create is just a weakness on the pawn on b2. And when we see examples like this, black very often tends to end up winning, and it has to do with that. If white ends up in a position like this, it's typically the weaker player who will then continue to make mistakes. But if you ask a computer, it will say, not to worry, this is an easy draw. And for a beginning, white is actually on the right track. So rook to c3, queen to b8, knight to c6, and there is a general swap on c6 like this, and then rook takes b2. This is the game. And well, the author says that the minority attack has succeeded, black gained a pawn, and now, well, has this sort of 4 versus 3 scenario with decent chances of winning. It's an interesting thing in terms of modern computers. I mean, well, this book sort of was made like 10 years ago, and AI computer engines has developed a lot since then. Especially sort of this idea of neural networks that are not only calculating machines, but has more, technically speaking, not intuition, but that's how it feels from my perspective, that they actually know certain things about structures, know certain things about endings. And they are pretty sure that due to the opposite color of the bishops, due to that there is only play on the king side, this is a trivial draw. Or rather, it's a trivial draw if you are an extremely strong player. I mean, I would imagine Magnus Carlsen drawing this with the white pieces. And obviously in the computer game, it would be a draw. In a game between mere humans, it is a different story. It's pretty unpleasant. And, well, if I didn't know this was actually quite an easy draw due to having access to the computer, I would argue, well, we have the second rank, right? We have a bishop coming to d4. f2 is very weak. This is going to be long and torturous for black. It seems not to be true in an objective sense, but in a practical sense, I guess very much so. But if you listen to the computer, it will say rook to d7. The author mentions position after this. He says black is clearly better, and he will try to progress slowly. The problem is that the phrase progress slowly, it's not true in an objective sense. I mean, white can defend apparently quite easily here. Well, it's a bit too far away from our subject, but I like to sort of, as an example of the developments of modern computers, and with that, our understanding of chess. In the game, he plays rook a1, and, well, this is given as just a blunder, because it loses an extra pawn. Actually, it could be seen as a brilliant defense. Again, computer says, no need to worry. The problem is the rook takes f2. Now we're going to win an extra pawn like this. White's idea was rook a8, and that basically forces this opposite colored bishop ending. Black has 2 extra pawns, and he wins it pretty easily. So it's logical to conclude that probably black is just winning here. At first sight, I would also think probably black is winning, although we have to pay attention to these things, that this bishop and this sort of the corner bishop being wrong from black's perspective could leave some drawing chances. I mean, imagine, well, if white can swap these 2 pawns and then sacrifice his bishop on these pawns, quite often it would be a draw. Again, we get this idea of how much computers have developed. I mean, just at the blip of a second, they immediately says this is a draw. And again, it's down to neural networks having this sort of, if not billions of games, millions of games experience, actually understanding that this structure is a draw. It's not raw calculations, it's more understanding in a way. Actually, the next move by black is a mistake. He should really try the move g6. It's not enough to win, but if white would go for this g4 plan, I'm going to praise later, then actually after bishop h4, white seems to be lost, because black would then sort of progress like this. And when we are trying to sacrifice our bishop sort of on the pawns advancing, the problem is in a position like this, yes, well, it is the wrong bishop, but the king is going to enter here, and the white king will be forced out from the f3 square. We're going to reach g2, and the h pawn is going to queen. And again, a computer will just understand this immediately. The game was bishop to d4 check, king g2, g6, and I'm not trying to make fun of our author. He just had very different tools. But here he misses a trivial draw. The computer nowadays just says g4, easy draw. Well, this was not the case when the book was published. I would have made the same mistake. And the difference is that, well, if you go f5, white is going to hurry with h4 and push h5, and it seems that there's just no way for black to make reasonable progress. And no, this is going far into an opposite colored bishop, ending in a sort of in a chessable course about pawn structures. I'm sorry about that, but I'm just fascinated with. I mean, this is such a horrible example from white's perspective, right? You have given away the pair of bishops. Black has sort of an easygoing minority attack, and these are things the author praises. I would praise it. We see the game going extremely easily for black, and I would take this position any chance I could against a lower rated opponent, and being pretty sure to win it, because, well, black looks jack is obviously better. But we see how easily the computer is actually sort of defending it. But chess is a practical game, and what we can do is to pose problems for our opponents, and this we will definitely do here. But it just gives away sort of some of this higher level understanding that the computers sort of is introducing to us. And no, as I mentioned, well, if you're Magnus Carlsen, maybe you draw this. For others, it's horrible torture. So never get this kind of position on purpose. It is obviously pleasant for black, but I thought it's a fascinating example when computers just sort of defend so effortlessly. Okay,